Why did my girlfriend's ex crash our engagement party, claiming I stole his life? The champagne glass shattered against the hardwood floor 3 feet from where I was standing, and my first thought wasn't about the mess or the sudden silence that fell over our engagement party. It was about the way Vanessa's face went completely white when she saw who was standing in our doorway. The man was maybe 6'1", athletic build, wearing an expensive suit that looked tailored specifically for him, and he was holding what appeared to be a stack of photographs in his left hand. His voice carried across the entire room when he spoke, loud enough that all 38 of our guests turned to stare. I'm Dominic Ashford, and this man stole my entire life. My job, my apartment, my identity, and apparently now my fiancé. He pointed directly at me, and I felt my stomach drop through the floor because I had absolutely no idea who this person was or what the hell he was talking about. I'd been planning this engagement party for 3 months, ever since Vanessa said yes on a beach in Maui during our vacation in August. We'd been dating for 2 years, living together for 1, and everything felt perfect in that way that makes you suspicious that something has to go wrong eventually. Vanessa worked as a marketing director for a tech startup downtown, made good money, had this infectious laugh that made everyone around her smile. I was a senior software engineer at Prometheus Digital, pulling in a solid 6-figure salary, had been there for 5 years, and just gotten promoted to lead architect. We lived in a 2-bedroom loft in the city that we decorated together, adopted a rescue dog named Copper, talked about kids in that vague future planning way that couples do. The party was supposed to be casual, close friends and family only, nothing fancy. My parents had flown in from Ohio, Vanessa's mom came up from San Diego, and we'd rented out the back room of our favorite Italian restaurant for the occasion. Everyone was happy, toasting us, making jokes about finally getting Vanessa to settle down. Then Dominic walked in and turned everything into a nightmare. Vanessa grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt, her fingernails digging into my skin through my shirt sleeve. "Dom," she whispered, and the way she said his name made my chest tighten. "What are you doing here?" Dominic smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who knows they're about to ruin your entire evening and is enjoying it. "I tried calling. I sent emails. You blocked me on everything, Van. What was I supposed to do?" He walked further into the room, and I noticed he had a slight limp, favoring his right leg. He spread the photographs across the nearest table, and people leaned in to look. I pushed forward to see what he was showing everyone, and my blood went cold. The photos showed me, my face, my build, wearing clothes I'd never owned, in places I'd never been. One showed me at what looked like a corporate office, sitting at a desk with a nameplate that read, Dominic Ashford, Senior Systems Analyst. Another showed me, standing in front of an apartment building I didn't recognize. A third was me, with Vanessa, except her hair was shorter, and she was wearing an engagement ring I'd never seen. Dominic's voice cut through the confused murmuring. "That's my desk at Helix Technologies. That's my apartment on Westlake Avenue. And that's my fiancée, taken 8 months before she apparently met you." My father stepped forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in immediately. "Son, what's he talking about?" I couldn't answer because I genuinely had no idea. I'd never heard of Helix Technologies, never lived on Westlake Avenue, and I'd met Vanessa at a friend's barbecue 2 years ago when she spilled wine on my shirt and spent 20 minutes apologizing. Dominic pulled out his phone, connected it to the restaurant's TV screen that had been showing our engagement photos, and suddenly there were more images. Bank statements showing accounts in my name with transaction histories I didn't recognize. Lease agreements for the Westlake apartment with my signature. Employment contracts from Helix Technologies dated 3 years ago. My social security number was on everything. Vanessa made a sound like she couldn't breathe, and when I looked at her, she was staring at the screen with an expression I couldn't read. Not confusion, not shock, something else entirely. Dominic continued. 6 months ago, I came home from a business trip and found my apartment cleaned out. My bank accounts drained. My job terminated for supposed performance issues that were fabricated. Vanessa was gone. Every trace of my life was just erased, and when I tried to report it, I discovered someone had been using my identity to build a completely different life across town. That someone was him. The room exploded into chaos. My mother started crying. Vanessa's mom stood up demanding explanations. My best friend Leo, who'd known me since college, shouted that this was insane, that I'd been working at Prometheus for 5 years, that he'd been to my apartment dozens of times. Dominic remained calm, almost unnaturally so, and kept presenting evidence. He showed emails from Vanessa to him discussing apartment hunting and job interviews, except they were addressed to my email address. He showed text message screenshots with my phone number, conversations about their relationship and future plans that supposedly happened while I was actually working 80-hour weeks at Prometheus. My hands started shaking as I pulled out my own phone and tried to verify anything he was saying. I Googled Helix Technologies and found a real company with an office 15 minutes from Prometheus. I searched my name plus Helix and found a LinkedIn profile I'd never created showing me as their senior systems analyst for the past 3 years. The profile picture was definitely me, same photo I used on my actual LinkedIn, but the work history was completely different. Someone had built an entire fake professional identity using my information, and apparently had been living that life while I was living mine. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. I turned to Vanessa, searching her face for some explanation that would make this make sense. Van, you've seen my work ID. You've been to Prometheus. You met my co-workers at the summer picnic. What is he talking about? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I can explain, she started, but Dominic cut her off. Can you explain why you told me you were moving to Seattle for a job opportunity when you were actually moving across town to be with him? Can you explain why you emptied our joint savings account and transferred it to an account in his name? Can you explain why you filed a false police report claiming I was stalking you to get a restraining order that I only found out about when I tried to visit my own mother in the hospital? He pulled out more papers, actual legal documents, and I recognized the county seal on them. A restraining order dated 6 months ago, filed by Vanessa against Dominic Ashford, claiming harassment and threatening behavior. Her signature was at the bottom. My signature was there too, as a witness, except I'd never signed any such document and had never even heard Dominic's name before tonight. The restaurant manager appeared, asking if we needed to call the police, and my father said yes immediately. Dominic smiled again. Please do. I've been trying to get them to investigate this identity theft for months. Maybe now they'll finally listen. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers who looked tired and annoyed at being called to what probably seemed like a domestic dispute. Officer Nguyen, older with gray at his temples, asked everyone to calm down and started taking statements. His partner, Officer Kemp, younger and more aggressive, separated me, Vanessa, and Dominic into different areas of the restaurant. I sat at a table with Officer Nguyen and tried to explain that I had no idea what Dominic was talking about, that I'd never met him before, that my entire life history could be verified through Prometheus Digital, my landlord, my bank. Nguyen took notes and asked for my identification. I handed over my driver's license, and he ran it through his system on a tablet. His expression changed. Mr. Donovan, are you aware there's a warrant for your arrest in King County for identity theft and financial fraud? The floor seemed to tilt underneath me. That's impossible. I've never been arrested. I've never even gotten a speeding ticket. Nguyen showed me the screen. There was my name, my social security number, my physical description, and an active warrant issued 3 months ago based on a complaint filed by Dominic Ashford. The warrant claimed I'd stolen his identity, accessed his financial accounts, and committed wire fraud totaling over $50,000. Officer Kemp came back with Vanessa, and her eyes were red like she'd been crying. Nguyen asked her directly, Ma'am, which one of these men were you engaged to first? She looked at me, looked at Dominic, and I saw her make a decision. Both of them, she said quietly. I was engaged to Dom for 6 months. Then I met Andrew and didn't know how to end things with Dom, so I just left. I thought it would be easier. The restaurant went completely silent. My mother made a noise like she'd been punched. Vanessa continued, I didn't know about any identity theft or fraud. I didn't take Dom's money. I just left him and started over with Andrew. I didn't know Andrew was using Dom's information for anything. He told me he worked at Prometheus. He showed me his work ID. I've been to his office. Officer Nguyen asked to see my work identification, and I pulled it from my wallet with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The ID was real, issued by Prometheus Digital Security Department, with my photo and employee number and the company logo. Nguyen photographed it with his phone, then asked me for my supervisor's contact information. I gave him my boss Richard's cell number, and Nguyen stepped away to make a call. While he was gone, Dominic spoke to me directly for the first time. I don't know how you did this, Andrew. I don't know how you built this elaborate cover story or convinced Vanessa to go along with it. But I've spent 6 months rebuilding my life from nothing, and I'm not going away until you're in prison for what you did to me. Officer Nguyen returned and asked me to stand up. My stomach dropped. Mr. Donovan, I spoke with Richard Kramer at Prometheus Digital. He confirms you've been employed there for 5 years. However, the warrant is still active, and I need to take you in for processing until this gets sorted out. My father immediately stepped in, announced he was a practicing attorney in Ohio, and that I wouldn't be answering any more questions without legal representation. Officer Nguyen seemed relieved by this, probably because it meant less paperwork for him tonight. He asked if I'd come voluntarily to the station for questioning, or if he needed to arrest me in front of everyone. I said I'd come voluntarily, and my father said he'd follow in his car. As Nguyen led me toward the door, I looked back at Vanessa. She was standing with Dominic, and he had his hand on her shoulder in a way that seemed possessive and protective at the same time. She wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother was sobbing openly now, and Leo was on his phone already, probably calling his lawyer friend from law school. The engagement party guests watched in complete silence as I was escorted out of the restaurant where we'd been celebrating my future 30 minutes earlier. The photos Dominic had brought were still spread across the table, showing my face living a life I'd never lived, loving a woman who apparently had been engaged to someone else when she met me. At the police station, I was processed through booking, even though the officers kept saying this was just for questioning. They took my fingerprints, photographed me, asked for a DNA swab, which my father advised me to refuse until we understood what we were being accused of. Detective Laura Brennan, 15 years with the Fraud Division, took over the case from the patrol officers. She was mid-40s, professional manner, and seemed genuinely interested in understanding what was happening rather than just closing a case. She laid out everything Dominic had provided: the bank statements, the employment records, the lease agreements, all showing my name and social security number, but a life history that contradicted my actual employment at Prometheus. Detective Brennan explained that identity theft usually went the other way, someone stealing your identity to commit crimes, but this case was unique because I allegedly had both the stolen identity and my own legitimate identity running simultaneously. She asked how that was possible. I told her I had no idea, that every document she was showing me was the first time I'd seen it, that my entire life could be verified through tax returns, employer records, my landlord, my bank. She said she'd already started that verification process, but it would take time. In the meantime, the warrant was real and had been issued based on substantial evidence. My father negotiated my release on my own recognizance given my employment stability and lack of criminal history, but I had to surrender my passport and agree to stay within county limits. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning when we left the police station. My father drove me home in silence, and when we pulled up to my building, I saw Vanessa's car was gone from her usual spot. I went upstairs and found the apartment dark and empty. Copper greeted me at the door, confused about why I was home so late and why his routine was disrupted. I fed him, then sat on the couch and tried to process what had just happened. My phone had 36 missed calls and over 100 text messages. Most were from guests at the party asking what was going on. Several were from Leo saying he'd found a criminal defense attorney who specialized in identity theft cases. 3 were from my boss Richard asking if the police call was a joke and if I needed help. Nothing from Vanessa. I called her number and it went straight to voicemail. I texted asking where she was, if she was okay, if we could talk. No response. My father had taken a room at a hotel nearby and said he'd stay in Seattle until this got resolved. My mother had flown back to Ohio that night, too upset to stay. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with my laptop and started building my own defense, gathering every piece of documentation I could find, proving my actual life history. Pay stubs from Prometheus going back 5 years, tax returns, bank statements showing consistent deposits from my employer, my lease agreement for this apartment signed 2 years ago, utility bills in my name, photos with timestamps showing me at Prometheus company events, at my desk, with co-workers who could verify I'd been working there continuously. The next morning, Friday, I called in sick to work. Richard called me back within 5 minutes asking what was really going on. I explained everything: the engagement party, Dominic's accusations, the police station, the evidence he'd presented. Richard was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Andrew, I've known you for 5 years. You're one of our best engineers. I don't believe for a second you're running some kind of double life. What do you need from me?" I asked if he could provide formal documentation of my employment history, attendance records, anything that proved I'd been at Prometheus during the times Dominic claimed I was working at Helix. Richard said he'd have HR pull everything and would personally write a statement. He also asked if I needed paid leave to deal with this, but I said no, I needed to keep working, needed the normalcy. That afternoon, I met with the attorney Leo had found, Benjamin Cross, who ran a boutique firm specializing in white-collar criminal defense. Cross was mid-30s, sharp dresser, came highly recommended despite his age. He reviewed everything I'd brought and everything the police had shared with my father. His assessment was grim. The evidence against you is substantial and sophisticated. Someone went through a lot of trouble to create this parallel identity. The fact that Vanessa confirmed she was engaged to both of you is particularly damaging. The question is whether you're a victim of identity theft yourself or whether you're the perpetrator. We need to prove the former definitively. Cross recommended hiring a forensic investigator to trace the digital footprints of how these fake documents were created. He knew someone, former FBI cybercrime specialist named Diana Kwan, who now worked private cases. Diana charged $400 per hour, and I agreed immediately because I had no choice. She came to Cross's office that same afternoon, mid-40s, all business, asked me detailed questions about my digital security practices. Did I use the same passwords across multiple sites? Had I ever lost my phone or laptop? Had I noticed any unusual activity on my accounts? I told her I used a password manager, had 2-factor authentication on everything important, had never had a device stolen. She said that level of security made internal compromise more likely than external hacking. Someone who knows you personally would have better access to your information than a random identity thief. Who in your life would have both motivation and opportunity to frame you? I thought about it and came up empty. My co-workers liked me. My friends had known me for years. My family was supportive. The only person who made sense was Vanessa. But why would she destroy her own relationship? Diana said she'd start with the digital forensics of the fake LinkedIn profile, the bank accounts, and the employment records from Helix Technologies. She'd also investigate Dominic Ashford to verify his claims were legitimate and he wasn't somehow involved in framing me. Vanessa finally called me Saturday afternoon. I was at my father's hotel room going through more documents when my phone rang. Her voice sounded small and scared. "Andrew, I'm so sorry. I didn't know any of this was going to happen." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Where are you?" She said she was staying with her friend Kelly, needed space to think. I asked her about Dominic, about their relationship, about whether she'd really been engaged to him. She admitted they'd dated for about a year, got engaged quickly, but she'd realized it was a mistake. She claimed she broke up with him properly, that she didn't just disappear, that Dominic was exaggerating what happened. I asked about the restraining order with my signature. She went quiet, then said she didn't know how my name got on that document, that she'd filed it alone at the courthouse. I asked if she'd told Dominic anything about me, given him my information, helped him in any way. She got defensive, said she couldn't believe I was accusing her of setting me up, that she loved me, that she'd never do anything to hurt me. I said the evidence suggested otherwise and asked her to meet with me and Benjamin Cross to give a formal statement. She hesitated, then agreed to come to his office on Monday. After we hung up, my father looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Son, you know you might have to accept that Vanessa was involved in this." I didn't want to believe it, but the doubts were growing. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. Diana Kwon called Sunday evening with preliminary findings. The fake LinkedIn profile had been created from an IP address that originated from a coffee shop 2 blocks from Helix Technologies, created 6 months before Vanessa and I supposedly met. The bank accounts at Westside Federal Credit Union showed the first deposit came from an account in Vanessa's name, transferred the same day she and I went on our first date according to my calendar. The employment records from Helix Technologies were harder to verify because the company was being uncooperative about sharing personnel information, but Diana had managed to confirm through a former employee that someone matching my description had worked there briefly under Dominic's name. The former employee described Dominic as quiet, kept to himself, always paid in cash at the cafeteria, never joined the team for after-work drinks. The description could have fit me, but it could have fit thousands of people. Diana said the most damning evidence was the apartment on Westlake Avenue. Property records showed it had been rented to Dominic Ashford 3 years ago, but the lease was modified 8 months ago to add my name as a co-tenant. The modification had my signature, notarized, along with copies of my driver's license and social security card. Diana asked if I'd ever been to that address. I pulled it up on Google Maps and stared at the street view. I'd never seen that building before in my life. She said we needed to visit the apartment and document what was there, but we'd need police presence to avoid accusations of trespassing or evidence tampering. Detective Brennan agreed to meet us at the Westlake apartment on Monday morning. She, Diana, Benjamin Cross, and I stood outside Unit 304 while the building manager unlocked the door. He was an older man named Harold Chen. Wait, I need to use a different name. The building manager, an older man named Harold Vickers, explained that Dominic Ashford had been a model tenant until about 6 months ago when he stopped paying rent. Eviction proceedings had started, but then someone claiming to be his roommate, my name, had paid 3 months back rent in cash and said Dominic had moved out. Harold had updated the lease accordingly based on the notarized documents provided. He'd only met me once, briefly, when the cash was delivered, and couldn't give a detailed description beyond average height, brown hair, kept his face turned away from the security cameras. The door opened into a studio apartment that was almost completely empty. A mattress on the floor, a small table, 2 folding chairs, and a mini fridge. No personal belongings, no clothes, no photos, nothing that indicated anyone actually lived there. Detective Brennan walked through taking photos while Diana examined the few items present. In the fridge was expired milk and condiments. In the trash can were takeout containers from restaurants I'd never eaten at. On the table was a single piece of mail addressed to me at this address from Westside Federal Credit Union, a statement for an account I'd never opened showing a balance of $18,000. Diana photographed everything, then asked Detective Brennan if we could access the building's security footage. Harold said the system only kept recordings for 30 days, but he could pull what was available. We went to his office and watched grainy footage of the building's entrance. Multiple people came and went, but none of them looked like me. Then, dated 3 weeks ago, someone entered wearing a baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses, and a jacket despite the warm weather. The person was my height and build, moved like me, but the face was completely obscured. Harold said that was the last time he'd seen anyone enter or leave Unit 304. Detective Brennan asked for copies of all the footage, the lease documents, and the rental payment records. She told Harold that this apartment was now part of an active criminal investigation and needed to be sealed. Harold looked worried about the lost rent revenue, but agreed. As we left, Benjamin Cross pulled me aside. "That apartment is staged. Someone set this up to look like you were living a double life, but there's no actual evidence anyone lived there. The question is whether the police will see it that way or whether they'll think you cleaned it out before bringing them here." I hadn't thought of that angle, and it made my chest tight with anxiety. Detective Brennan said she'd continue investigating, but warned that the evidence remained complicated and contradictory. Vanessa met us at Benjamin Cross's office Monday afternoon, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt with her hair pulled back, looking nothing like the confident woman I'd fallen in love with. Diana Kwon was there along with a court reporter Cross had hired to document everything officially. Vanessa signed a statement agreeing to be recorded and to answer questions honestly. Cross started gently, asking about her relationship with Dominic, when they'd met, how long they'd dated, when they'd gotten engaged. Vanessa explained they'd met through a dating app 3 years ago, dated for 8 months, got engaged quickly because Dominic had been very insistent about moving forward. She described him as intense, controlling, jealous of her friends and co-workers. She said she'd broken up with him by text message after he went on a business trip, that she'd moved out of his apartment while he was gone, that she'd changed her number and blocked him on social media. Cross asked about the restraining order. Vanessa admitted she'd filed it because Dominic had been sending her letters at work, showing up at her gym, following her car. She claimed she'd gone to the courthouse alone and filed the paperwork herself, that she'd never asked me to be a witness because I hadn't known Dominic existed at that point. Cross showed her the restraining order document with my signature as a witness. Vanessa stared at it and said she'd never seen that version, that the copy she had didn't have a witness signature. Cross asked her to produce her copy. She pulled it from her bag, and indeed, the document she had was different. It showed her signature and the judge's stamp, but the witness line was blank. Diana Kwan examined both documents and noted they had different case numbers. Someone had created a fraudulent version of the restraining order adding my information. Cross asked Vanessa directly if she'd ever given anyone my social security number, driver's license, or personal information. She hesitated, then admitted that Dominic had asked her about me early on, wanted to know who she was seeing, and she'd mentioned my name and where I worked. She swore she'd never given him my social security number or copies of my ID, but she had told him details about my life during one particularly nasty argument when Dominic had accused her of cheating. She'd thrown the truth at him to hurt him, told him she'd moved on with someone better, someone more successful, given him enough details that he could have found me online. Cross asked when this argument happened. Vanessa said about 7 months ago, which aligned exactly with when the fake identity started being built. Diana asked if Vanessa had ever accessed my wallet, my laptop, my personal documents. Vanessa admitted she knew where I kept my social security card because she'd seen it when we filed our joint rental application. She'd also had access to my laptop because we lived together, and I'd given her the password. Her face crumpled as she realized what she was admitting. You think I gave Dom this information to frame Andrew? I would never do that. I love Andrew. I want to marry him. Cross asked about the bank account at Westside Federal Credit Union. Vanessa went pale. I opened that account, she admitted, but not for Andrew. Dom told me he needed help hiding money from his ex-wife, who was trying to take everything in their divorce. He said he needed an account in someone else's name temporarily, and he'd pay me $5,000 to open it. I was stupid and desperate for money because I'd just lost my job, so I agreed. He gave me cash to deposit, and I thought that was the end of it. I never knew he was putting Andrew's name on anything. Cross showed her the bank statements with my name as the account holder and her name only as the initial depositor. She looked genuinely shocked. That's not what the account was supposed to be. Dom told me it would be in my name. He must have changed it somehow. Diana asked if she still had any communication with Dominic about this arrangement. Vanessa pulled out her phone and scrolled through old text messages. She'd deleted most of their conversation, but her phone had backed some up to the cloud. She showed us messages from 7 months ago where Dominic asked her to open a bank account for him, promising payment and swearing it was legal. The messages were vague enough to be deniable, but specific enough to show a pattern of manipulation. Cross asked if she'd ever received the $5,000. Vanessa shook her head. Dominic had ghosted her after she opened the account, and she'd assumed the deal fell through. After Vanessa left, Diana, Cross, and I sat in his conference room analyzing what we'd learned. Diana believed Dominic had orchestrated an elaborate revenge scheme against Vanessa for leaving him, and I was collateral damage because she'd made the mistake of telling him about me. He'd used the information she provided to build a fake identity in my name, created the appearance of a double life, and then waited months before publicly destroying both of us. The engagement party was the perfect stage for maximum humiliation and damage. Cross agreed with the theory, but said proving it would be difficult because much of the evidence was digital and could be argued as circumstantial. We needed to find concrete proof that Dominic had created these documents, accessed these accounts, and deliberately framed me. Diana said she'd start with Dominic's own digital footprint, see if she could trace any of the fake account creations back to his devices or IP addresses. She'd also investigate his background more thoroughly, see if he had a history of this kind of behavior. Cross said he'd file a motion with the court to have the warrant against me dismissed based on the evidence we'd gathered, but warned it might not work until we had more definitive proof. I asked what I was supposed to do in the meantime. Cross said, continue documenting my actual life, maintain my job at Prometheus, and avoid any contact with Dominic or actions that could be construed as threatening. That night, I went home to an empty apartment. Vanessa texted saying she needed more time to think about our relationship, that she felt guilty for her part in what happened, even if it was unintentional. I understood, but it still hurt. Copper sensed something was wrong and wouldn't leave my side. I sat on the floor of my living room and tried to figure out how my life had become this nightmare. 3 days ago, I was celebrating my engagement, planning a future with the woman I loved, confident in my career and my identity. Now I was facing criminal charges, my fiancé was gone, and a man I'd never met had convinced half the people I knew that I'd stolen his life. My phone rang, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Dominic's voice came through, calm and measured. Andrew, we should talk. Just the two of us, no lawyers or police. I think there's been a massive misunderstanding, and we can work this out. Every instinct told me this was a trap, but I needed to understand what he wanted. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop the next morning, public place, during busy hours. He said that worked perfect for him, and I detected something in his voice that sounded like satisfaction. I called Benjamin Cross immediately after hanging up and told him about the meeting. He said absolutely not, that I was walking into either a setup or a dangerous confrontation. I explained that I needed to hear directly from Dominic what he wanted, what his endgame was, and Cross reluctantly agreed as long as I wore a recording device and he monitored from a nearby table. Diana Kwan offered to set up audio surveillance in case Dominic swept me for recording devices, and we arranged to meet at her office at 8 o'clock the next morning to prepare. I barely slept again, running through scenarios in my head. What did Dominic really want? If his goal was revenge against Vanessa, he'd already humiliated her publicly. If he wanted money, he hadn't made any demands. If he wanted to destroy me specifically, framing me for identity theft seemed like an elaborate way to do it. There had to be something else, some motivation I wasn't seeing. At Diana's office, she fitted me with a small recording device hidden in my watch and a backup microphone disguised as a button on my shirt. Cross gave me clear instructions. Don't admit to anything, don't make threats, don't let Dominic provoke me into saying something that could be used against me. Just listen, ask questions, and try to get him talking about what he'd done. If he admitted to framing me, we'd have everything we needed. The coffee shop was crowded when I arrived at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, exactly as planned. Dominic was already there, sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall, sipping something that looked like black coffee. He waved when he saw me, friendly and casual like we were old friends meeting for a chat. I sat down across from him, and he smiled. Thanks for coming, Andrew. I know this whole situation must be stressful for you. I studied his face, looking for any sign of the anger or hostility he'd shown at the engagement party. He seemed completely different now, relaxed and sympathetic. Dominic, what do you want? He sighed and leaned back in his chair. Honestly, I want my life back. 6 months ago, someone systematically destroyed everything I'd built. My job, my home, my relationship with Vanessa. The evidence pointed to you, and I spent weeks trying to figure out why someone I'd never met would target me like that. Then I realized something. You're as much a victim in this as I am. I kept my expression neutral. What do you mean? Dominic pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was a man who looked remarkably like both of us. Same height, same build, similar facial features. This is my brother, Nathan Ashford. We're twins. Fraternal, not identical, but close enough that people confuse us. Nathan has been in and out of mental institutions for the past 5 years. 3 months ago, he disappeared from a facility in Oregon. Last I heard, he was in Seattle. My stomach dropped. Dominic continued. Nathan has always been obsessed with me. Wanted my life, my success, my relationships. When we were kids, he'd steal my identity for small things. Pretend to be me at school, use my name at stores, tell people he was me. It got worse as we got older. He's been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder and pathological jealousy. Our parents tried to get him help, but he'd always run away from treatment. When Vanessa left me, I was devastated. I posted about it on social media, talked about her with friends, was pretty public about the breakup. Nathan must have been watching, saw an opportunity, and decided to become me. He found out about you through Vanessa, realized you looked enough like us to pull off an identity swap, and created this whole scenario to destroy both of us. Dominic showed me medical records for Nathan Ashford, discharge papers from a psychiatric facility, police reports about harassment and identity theft attempts. Everything looked official and legitimate. Why would he target me specifically? Dominic shrugged. Because Vanessa moved on with you. You represent everything Nathan wants and can't have. A stable career, a real relationship, a normal life. By framing you as me, he gets to destroy both of us while living out some twisted fantasy. I asked if he'd told the police about Nathan. Dominic said he'd tried, but they dismissed it as a conspiracy theory without proof. He wanted my help to track Nathan down and expose what he'd done. I left the coffee shop more confused than when I'd entered. Cross and Diana met me at a park nearby to debrief, and I played them the entire recording. Diana looked skeptical. This could be true, or it could be an elaborate story Dominic made up to shift blame. We need to verify everything he told you. She started with the psychiatric facility in Oregon, called them pretending to be a family member looking for Nathan Ashford. They confirmed a patient by that name had been discharged 3 months ago but couldn't provide details. She checked missing persons databases and found a report filed by someone named Patricia Ashford for her son Nathan, matching the description and timeline Dominic gave. The medical records appeared legitimate when Diana checked their certification stamps and facility information. Cross said this changed everything, because if Nathan existed and had a history of identity manipulation, it provided an alternative suspect for the fraud. But it also made our case more complicated because we'd need to prove Nathan was responsible, not me and not Dominic. We needed to find Nathan Ashford and get answers directly from him. Diana said she'd use her FBI contacts to track him down through financial records, social media, known associates. In the meantime, We needed to keep building my defense in case Nathan couldn't be located. Detective Brennan called me that afternoon with news. Helix Technologies had finally cooperated with the investigation and provided employment records for Dominic Ashford. The records showed he'd worked there for 2 years before being terminated for cause 3 months ago due to multiple complaints about workplace behavior and performance issues. The termination documents were signed by the HR director and included specific incidents. However, when Detective Brennan showed the HR director my photo, the woman said I'd never worked there and she'd never seen me before. She described Dominic Ashford as taller than me, thinner face, different mannerisms. The description didn't match Dominic, who'd crashed my party, and it didn't match me. It could match a third person. Detective Brennan said she was now operating on the theory that someone had been impersonating Dominic Ashford at Helix Technologies, while Dominic had been working somewhere else under his real identity. She'd pulled Dominic's actual employment records from the state database and found he'd been working at a consulting firm called Apex Solutions during the same time period he supposedly worked at Helix. This meant someone else had taken his identity to get hired at Helix, and that someone looked enough like both of us to pull it off. The Nathan theory was gaining credibility. Diana located Nathan Ashford's last known address through a contact at the Social Security Administration. He'd been collecting disability benefits and had them sent to an apartment in the International District. Diana, Cross, and I met Detective Brennan there on Thursday afternoon, and she brought 2 patrol officers as backup. The apartment building was run down, the kind of place where people didn't ask questions as long as rent was paid. The manager said Unit 12 had been rented to Nathan Ashford 6 months ago, paid in cash, kept to himself, hadn't been seen in about a week. Detective Brennan requested entry, and the manager unlocked the door. What we found inside made my blood run cold. The walls were covered with photographs, pictures of me from my social media, printed and pinned up with notes scrawled in margins. Pictures of Dominic from what looked like years ago, same treatment. Pictures of Vanessa with both of us, edited to insert a third face I'd never seen before, Nathan. He'd created a shrine to the life he wanted, a collage of our identities mixed together into some fantasy version of himself. On a desk in the corner were multiple laptops, all open to different screens. One showed the fake LinkedIn profile, another showed the bank account at Westside Federal, a third showed email accounts in my name that I'd never created. Detective Brennan called for a forensics team immediately. Diana started photographing everything while wearing gloves. Cross documented it on video. I stood in the doorway trying to process what I was seeing. Nathan had built an entire operation dedicated to stealing our identities, merging our lives, and destroying us in the process. On the desk was a journal, handwritten, dated entries going back months. I asked Detective Brennan if I could read it, and she said only with gloves, and only what was visible without disturbing the scene. The entries were disturbing. Nathan described watching me at Prometheus, following me home, learning my routines. He described confronting Vanessa at her gym, pretending to be Dominic, getting her to talk about their relationship. He described opening the bank accounts, creating the employment records at Helix, building the fake life piece by piece. And he described his plan for the engagement party, how he'd show up pretending to be Dominic, reveal everything publicly, and watch both of our lives explode. The final entry, dated 2 days ago, said, Phase 1 complete. Andrew destroyed. Dominic blamed. Now I can finally be free. Detective Brennan read over my shoulder and immediately put out an APB for Nathan Ashford as a suspect in identity theft, fraud, and harassment. The forensics team arrived and started processing the apartment as a crime scene. They found more evidence than we could have hoped for. Documents showing Nathan's discharge from the psychiatric facility, correspondence with the facility showing he'd been planning his escape for months, bank statements showing cash withdrawals that matched the timing of payments for the Westlake apartment, and the Helix employment documentation. They found a printer with the exact paper stock used for the fake lease documents, a notary stamp kit purchased online, and a heat press machine for creating false identification. Diana pointed out that Nathan had essentially built a full-scale identity theft operation, and we'd only scratched the surface. The computers would need extensive forensic analysis to determine everything he'd done. Detective Brennan said this evidence was more than enough to clear me of the original charges and shift the investigation to finding Nathan. She'd work with the prosecutor's office to have my warrant dismissed immediately. I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized was suffocating me. Cross said he'd file emergency motions first thing Friday morning to officially clear my name and potentially pursue charges against Nathan for false reporting and fraud. Dominic showed up at the apartment building while we were still processing the scene. Detective Brennan had called him as a courtesy since Nathan was his brother, and technically this involved his identity too. Dominic looked shaken when he saw what was inside Nathan's apartment. He sat on the curb outside while officers worked, head in his hands, and when I walked over, he looked up with genuine anguish on his face. I should have known. I should have seen the signs. Nathan's been doing this our whole lives, but I never thought he'd go this far. I'm sorry, Andrew. I'm sorry for what I said at your party, for accusing you, for the warrant. I was so convinced you'd destroyed my life that I didn't stop to think someone else might be destroying both of us. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was angry that he'd created this nightmare. Part of me understood he was a victim too. I asked him when he'd last seen Nathan. Dominic said about a year ago, before Nathan's last hospitalization. They'd had a fight about Nathan's treatment, about his refusal to stay on medication, and Dominic had told Nathan he was done enabling his behavior. Nathan had responded by threatening to become Dominic, saying if Dominic didn't want him as a brother, he'd just take Dominic's place. Dominic thought it was just another one of Nathan's empty threats. He'd never imagined Nathan would actually follow through. I asked if he had any idea where Nathan might have gone. Dominic pulled out his phone and showed me a text message he'd received 2 days ago from an unknown number. You got what you deserved, both of you. Enjoy the lives I built for you. Dominic hadn't understood the message at the time, but now it made horrible sense. Nathan was taunting them, celebrating the chaos he'd created. Detective Brennan took screenshots of the message and started tracing the number. Within an hour, her tech team determined it was a burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store in Bellingham, a city 2 hours north near the Canadian border. She coordinated with Border Patrol to flag Nathan's passport in case he tried to leave the country, but Diana pointed out that if Nathan had been creating false identities this whole time, he probably had multiple passports and identification under different names. The search for Nathan became a multi-agency operation. Detective Brennan briefed the FBI field office in Seattle about the identity theft ring. Diana used her former bureau contacts to access databases tracking known identity thieves and fraudsters. Cross worked with the prosecutor to ensure that when Nathan was found, the charges would stick. I went home Friday night exhausted and traumatized, but finally believing this nightmare might actually end. Vanessa called me Saturday morning asking to meet. We agreed on a neutral location, a park where we'd gone on one of our first dates. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days, and when she saw me, she started crying immediately. I'm so sorry, Andrew, for everything, for telling Dom about you, for opening that bank account, for not seeing what was happening. I destroyed us because I was stupid and careless. I wanted to be angry, wanted to tell her that her mistakes had nearly cost me my freedom and my reputation, but looking at her broken face, I felt mostly just sad. I explained what we'd found in Nathan's apartment, how he'd orchestrated everything, how both she and Dominic had been manipulated. She said she'd been thinking about our relationship, about whether we could recover from this. I admitted I didn't know. The trust was broken, not just because of what she'd done, but because our entire foundation felt shaky now. We'd built a life together while someone else was actively trying to destroy it, and I didn't know how to separate what was real from what was performance. She asked if I wanted to end the engagement, and I said I needed time to figure that out. We weren't broken up, but we weren't together either. We were in limbo, waiting for Nathan to be caught, waiting for life to make sense again. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. A psychiatric social worker named Dr. Eleanor Kim called Detective Brennan after seeing Nathan's photo on the news as a wanted suspect. Dr. Kim had been Nathan's therapist at the Oregon facility and had stayed in contact with him after his discharge against protocol because she was worried about his mental state. Nathan had been calling her from different numbers every few days, talking about his project and how he was finally going to prove he deserved the life his brother had. Dr. Kim had thought he was speaking metaphorically about improving himself, but after seeing the news coverage, she realized Nathan had been describing his identity theft scheme. She had call logs and notes from their conversations that could help track his location. Detective Brennan worked with Dr. Kim to set up a monitored call where she'd try to get Nathan to reveal where he was. The call happened Monday afternoon, with FBI agents recording and tracing the number in real time. Dr. Kim asked Nathan how his project was going, and Nathan's voice on the recording was calm and almost pleased with himself. It worked perfectly, Dr. Kim. I showed everyone that I'm just as good as Dominic, just as worthy. Andrew Donovan is ruined, Dominic is exposed as a liar, and I got to watch it all unfold exactly as I planned. Dr. Kim asked where Nathan was planning to go next. He laughed and said somewhere people would appreciate his talents, maybe California, maybe internationally. He said he'd already created 3 new identities and had the resources to disappear whenever he wanted. The FBI traced the call to a motel in Tacoma, about 30 minutes from Seattle. SWAT teams were dispatched immediately while Nathan was still on the phone. Dr. Kim kept him talking about his feelings, his motivations, his plans for the future. Nathan described the engagement party in detail, how satisfying it had been to see the confusion and pain on everyone's faces, how Vanessa had looked at me like I was a stranger, how my parents had looked betrayed. He said it was the culmination of months of work, and he'd documented everything in case anyone ever doubted what he'd accomplished. The trace confirmed he was at the Rainier Motel, room 23. SWAT moved into position while Nathan continued talking. Dr. Kim asked if he felt any remorse, and Nathan said, "Remorse? For what? For finally taking what should have been mine? For showing Dominic that I'm just as capable as him? For proving that Andrew's perfect life was just an illusion I could shatter whenever I wanted?" The phone went dead as SWAT breached the room. Nathan was arrested without incident. He'd been sitting in the motel room surrounded by more laptops, more fake documents, more photographs, calmly talking to Dr. Kim until the moment officers grabbed him. Detective Brennan called me an hour after the arrest to let me know Nathan was in custody and would be charged with multiple felonies: identity theft, wire fraud, forgery, false reporting, and harassment. The evidence from his apartment and the motel room, combined with the recorded confession to Dr. Kim, made the case airtight. I asked if I could see him, speak to him, understand why he'd chosen me specifically. Detective Brennan said absolutely not, that Nathan was being evaluated by psychiatrists to determine competency to stand trial, and any contact could compromise the case. She said Nathan had been diagnosed with severe antisocial personality disorder on top of his existing conditions, that he showed no remorse, and that he'd likely spend years in either prison or a secure psychiatric facility. Benjamin Cross filed motions that same day to have all charges against me formally dismissed and to clear my record of any association with the fraud. The prosecutor's office agreed immediately, embarrassed that they'd nearly prosecuted the wrong person. By Wednesday, I received official notification that my case was closed, my warrant was voided, and I was cleared of all suspicion. The media picked up the story that week. Identity theft scheme targets innocent tech worker and brother, ran in the Seattle Times. Twins' obsession leads to elaborate frame job, was the headline in the Post-Intelligencer. My name was mentioned as a victim, which felt strange after weeks of being treated like a criminal. Dominic gave an interview talking about his brother's mental illness and how the system had failed to keep Nathan in treatment. Vanessa stayed silent, deleted her social media accounts, and according to mutual friends, was seeing a therapist to process everything that had happened. My employer, Prometheus Digital, released a statement supporting me and confirming my employment status had never been in question. Richard personally called to say my job was secure and to take whatever time I needed. The engagement party guests who'd witnessed Nathan's performance started reaching out with apologies, saying they should have believed me immediately, asking if there was anything they could do. I appreciated the sentiment, but mostly wanted to be left alone to rebuild my life in peace. My parents came back to Seattle to spend a week with me, and having them there helped more than I'd expected. We didn't talk about the case much, just existed together while I remembered what normal felt like. Nathan's trial was scheduled for 6 months out, but his attorney immediately filed for a competency evaluation. A court-appointed psychiatrist, Dr. Robert Green, spent weeks evaluating Nathan and concluded he understood the charges against him and could assist in his own defense, but that his mental illness was a significant factor in his actions. The prosecutor offered a plea deal: 15 years in prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment, or risk trial, and potentially face 25 years if convicted on all counts. Nathan's attorney recommended taking the deal. During the plea hearing, I sat in the gallery next to Dominic, and we watched Nathan stand before the judge and accept responsibility for what he'd done. He showed no emotion, just nodded as each charge was read. The judge asked if he understood he was giving up his right to trial. Nathan said yes in a voice that was eerily similar to mine and Dominic's, and I realized again how easily he'd been able to impersonate both of us. The judge accepted the plea and set sentencing for 2 months later. As Nathan was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he turned and looked directly at me. No anger, no regret, just curiosity, like I was an interesting experiment he'd completed. I looked away and didn't watch him go. Vanessa and I tried to rebuild our relationship over the following months, going to couples therapy with Dr. Rachel Foster. Wait, I used that name already. We went to couples therapy with a psychologist named Dr. Melissa Harper, who specialized in trauma recovery. Dr. Harper worked with us on trust rebuilding, communication, and processing the violation we'd both experienced. Vanessa was genuinely remorseful about her role, took full responsibility for being careless with my information, and worked hard to prove she'd learned from the mistakes. But something had changed between us that couldn't be repaired. The easy comfort was gone, replaced by a wariness that made everything feel forced. 3 months after Nathan's arrest, we had an honest conversation about our future. I told her I loved her, but didn't know if I could marry someone I'd always wonder about, always question whether her judgment would put us at risk again. She said she understood, and that she'd been feeling the same doubts. We ended the engagement quietly. No drama, just a mutual acknowledgement that sometimes love isn't enough when the foundation is cracked. She moved out 2 weeks later, and we stayed in occasional contact as friends, but the romantic relationship was over. I kept Copper because he'd always been more mine than ours, and having him around helped with the loneliness. Nathan's sentencing hearing happened on a cold January morning. The courtroom was packed with people whose lives he'd touched. Former therapists, facility staff who'd tried to help him, even some victims from previous smaller identity theft attempts we'd learned about during the investigation. Dominic gave a victim impact statement about growing up with a brother who'd stolen his identity repeatedly, about the pain of watching someone you love destroy themselves and everyone around them. I gave a statement about the weeks of terror, about facing criminal charges for crimes I didn't commit, about losing my fiancé and my sense of safety. The prosecutor presented evidence of Nathan's sophisticated operation, the planning involved, the psychological manipulation. Nathan's defense attorney argued for leniency based on mental illness, pleaded for treatment over pure punishment. The judge listened to everything, reviewed the psychiatric reports, and then sentenced Nathan to 18 years in a maximum security prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment. Nathan would be eligible for parole after 12 years if he completed treatment and demonstrated genuine rehabilitation. The judge said she wanted to balance punishment with the reality of mental illness, but couldn't ignore the deliberate, calculated nature of Nathan's crimes. As Nathan was led away, Dominic stood up and said, "I'm sorry," but it was unclear if he was apologizing to the court, to me, or to his brother. Nathan didn't respond. Life slowly returned to normal after that, or at least a new version of normal. I kept working at Prometheus, got promoted to senior architect 6 months later, bought a house outside the city with a yard where Copper could run, started dating again carefully, being more cautious about who I let into my life and what information I shared, met someone named Claire Thompson through friends, and we've been seeing each other for 4 months now, taking things slow, both of us carrying baggage from past relationships, but trying to build something healthy. I occasionally see Dominic around Seattle. We live in the same city after all, and we've developed an odd sort of friendship based on shared trauma. We get coffee every few months, talk about how we're coping, share updates on Nathan's treatment progress reports. The psychiatric facility sends us both updates because we're listed as his emergency contacts. Nathan's making progress, apparently, taking medication, engaging in therapy, working through the obsessive patterns that drove his behavior. Whether he'll actually be rehabilitated remains to be seen. Part of me hopes he finds peace. Part of me will never forgive him for what he did. A year after Nathan's sentencing, I got a letter from him. It came through the prison's approved correspondence system, screened by psychiatrists before being sent. The letter was surprisingly coherent and reflective. Nathan wrote that he'd been working with Dr. Eleanor Kim, who'd started volunteering at the prison's mental health program, and that he'd begun to understand how his obsession with Dominic had destroyed multiple lives, including his own. He wrote that framing me had never been personal, that I was just a convenient target because Vanessa had chosen me, and his fractured mind saw that as another thing Dominic had that he didn't. He apologized for the pain he'd caused and said he understood if I never forgave him. The letter ended with a request that I not respond, that he didn't deserve my attention or energy, but he wanted me to know that he was trying to become someone who wouldn't hurt people anymore. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away in a drawer with all the other documents from that period of my life. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I will, but not yet. The wound is still too fresh, and I'm still learning how to trust my own judgment again after everything that happened. These days, I'm careful about my digital security in ways I never was before. 2-factor authentication on everything, regular credit monitoring, passwords changed monthly, social media locked down tight. Diana Kwan sends me quarterly reports updating my security status and flagging any unusual activity on my accounts. Benjamin Cross checks in occasionally to make sure no new legal issues have emerged. Detective Brennan retired last year, but sent me a card saying my case was one of the most complex she'd ever worked, and that she was glad justice prevailed. The anniversary of the engagement party passed a few weeks ago, and I spent it quietly at home with Copper, thinking about how much life can change in a single moment, how trust can be shattered by someone you've never met, how identity is more fragile than we'd like to believe, how the people who should protect you can accidentally destroy you, and strangers can save you when you least expect it. I survived something that could have ruined my life permanently, and while the scars remain, they've made me more careful, more aware, more grateful for the authentic relationships I still have. That's the best I can do with what happened. That's how I choose to move forward. That's how Nathan Ashford doesn't get to steal my future, even though he tried his best to steal my life. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.